was the beginning of the Chinese New Year, the Lunar New Year, an auspicious turning to the year of the ox. In Chan Buddhism, the 10 ox herding pictures dating back to the 11th or 12th century China became an iconic map for the spiritual journey. Chan in China, then Zen in Japan, and so on, Korea, Vietnam, now the West. These 10 images, each one encircled in an enso, that endless, infinite circle, and each with an accompanying poem. They depict the life of practice, beginning with searching for the ox, searching for one's own true nature, discovering its footprints, glimpsing the ox, maybe just the tail, maybe a hoof or a hind leg, catching the ox, taming the ox, it's called, riding it home, then being at home with the ox in total rest and repose. Then transcending ox and self. So just the empty circle. Arriving at the source is the 9th picture. So dwelling in one's true abode is a line from that verse. And then the 10th picture, returning to the marketplace. The process has stages, but it's more spiral than linear, circling back with ever greater depth and clarity. The final stage is forgetting anything like enlightenment and freely living in service to the world. This is sometimes called the Great Return. Wherever you may be on this spiral journey, take heart. Our feet are on the path. The great 13th century Zen master Eihei Dogen called this the path of practice awakening. And when we try to transpose that, to convey that in English, it's just with a hyphen, practice awakening. I imagine these characters just laid on top of each other. Just to begin is to embody awakening, even if you don't have any idea about what that is. In fact, all the better. So to begin, this weekend is designed, offered as an intro retreat. And there are several people here for whom this is a first retreat. But actually, we are all beginners, and it's a great advantage. It's really true. One of the recommended books on Mountain Cloud's website is Shunryu Suzuki's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Early on in that book, Suzuki Roshi says, beginner's mind is the mind of compassion. What is the mind of compassion? Well, No preconceived notions, no perspective from which to compare, no basis for expectation, no ground for the inner critic to stand on. Beginner's mind. Beginner's mind is a practice instruction and an expression of reality. It's how things really are. So the instruction, keep coming home to the present moment, always beginning now. And the reality we're invited to taste and explore in this practice, what we call the present moment, is timeless and boundless. Zen speaks of infinite possibilities, no knowing, or this phrase, the mind of before knowing. Such compassion. It's another name for now. Nothing but this. Someone mentioned having studied with Robert Aitken Roshi, this renowned American Zen teacher, taught for so long in Hawaii, Diamond Sangha. Aitken Roshi liked to say, Zen is the mind of curiosity. Really don't know. It's a state of mind that's sometimes called choiceless awareness, or resting in the space of the unconditioned. Invite yourself to sit in non-judgmental awareness, introspective availability. One teacher says, this practice makes us fetchable. Invite this. And you come into this fertile ground for exploration, right where you are. So what is Zen? We've already heard two responses. The 10 ox herding pictures depict Zen as a path of awakening, lifelong, unending. But the practice of Zen is to cultivate present moment awareness, on the cushion, off the cushion. Ruben Habito Roshi, my first teacher, expresses both of these aspects in this line I often quote, where he wrote, Zen is awakening to the dynamic reality of the present moment. Fitting to this Valentine's weekend. More recently, Ruben has said, Zen is finding love in all things, all the time. Really, all things. From a historical perspective, Zen is a practice with its roots in Mahayana Buddhism, the stream of Buddhism that traces its lineage back to Shakyamuni Buddha some 2,600 years ago. I mean, broadly, the other two streams of Buddhism are Theravada, out of which comes Vipassana, and Vajrayana, the Buddhism of Tibet. So Mahayana, this umbrella out of which Sambo Zen springs, it's an expression. Mahayana Buddhism developed in China about 1500 years ago with an emphasis on compassion. So, not so much individual awakening, but the awakening of all. This is sometimes called the Bodhisattva path. The more we do this practice, the clearer it becomes that when you sit, the whole world is sitting. And we are then kind of imbued with this impulse to get up off the cushion and have everything you do be an act of service. I was reflecting on this for today, and the story, this origin story of Zen just came flooding in. So here it comes. Keep in mind, it's impossible to say the same thing twice. Never heard it before. Siddhartha Gautama was born, this figure some 2,600 years ago, born into a princely family, beloved son of a chief in this Shakya clan. He grew up inside palace walls, every need met, including the needs of the heart. Gautama married in joy, and his wife bore a son. Stories describe a life of ease and well-being, of delight. One day, Gautama convinces his charioteer to take him outside the palace walls. There, for the first time, he encounters old age, illness, death. And he also sees an ascetic, a sage, realizing that suffering and loss happen to everyone. He's seized by a sense of urgency, this great matter, Zen calls it, the great matter of life and death, seized by the question of suffering and determined to find a path to the resolution of suffering, the total resolution. So he leaves the palace and joins a small band of ascetics, practicing intensely, so extremely that 6 years in and still with no resolution, Gautama realized he would die of his austerities if he kept on in that way. That's no help. You're not going to find what you're searching for if you die out of this practice, die in that way. So according to the story, one day sitting in the blistering heat, Gautama felt a slight breeze. He couldn't help feeling it. This is the record, that he couldn't help but sense the gentle cool. And somehow in that moment, in that subtle sense of relief, he remembered a time years before when he was a young child at a plowing festival on his father's land. His nurse leaves him playing under a tree, safe there, so she can join the festivities. And suddenly, with this breeze, he remembers feeling a deep sense of peace and ease sitting there. As he sat in the shade of the tree, that flowering tree, a plow dug into the earth nearby, ceremonially turning the first soil, this plowing festival. And Gautama saw the life teeming beneath the grass, thrown into chaos, insects killed, habitats upended. His heart felt the pull of that suffering as his very own suffering. He felt the tug of compassion. Sensing the comfort of the breeze and recalling that scene, Gautama abandoned ascetic practice and decided to trust his heart. He accepts a drink and something to eat, bathes in the river, and takes up what he calls the middle way. He sat down under the Bodhi tree in total absorption. Sat until one morning in the early pre-dawn, the light of his eyes met the light of the morning star. And suddenly, there was just one shining. Awakened, the Buddha exclaimed, "I and the great earth and all beings simultaneously attain the way." One awakening, one boundlessness, one existence. Repose and bliss. The record says that Shakyamuni Buddha didn't move from his seat. Nothing to do, no need. And according to the story, a local god comes to him and says, "You have to get up. You have to teach." And the Buddha says, "No one will understand this. How could words convey?" But in the end, he is persuaded. So he does, actually for 49 years. It's said that the Buddha's first teaching was stop and see. In the Sanskrit, the Pali, sunyata, and vipassana. Stop and see. Stop the discursive narrative. Stop the construct, the story making around who you think you are. Stop the calculations. Let your mind come to rest. Let your heart open. Then what? One teacher calls it your original spontaneity, another, your native ground. Stop and see. So, how do we do this? The nucleus, really, of this practice is silent sitting, zazen. Chan or jhana in Sanskrit and Indian, they simply means meditation, absorption. And as we were guiding earlier, there are these three basic elements: posture, breathing, stilling the mind. This balance, this frame, the natural strength of our skeletal support, and then the ease, this body. So, posture, and then breathing, just to let breathing be natural. There's no need to force anything, to make any effort, add any pressure. Just breathe and follow it. You can let your attention be on the air entering your body in and out. You can feel that point. Or some like to let the attention drop into the belly, the bottom of the breath, sometimes called the hara. But there's no need to force it, just follow it. And then stilling the mind. One helpful practice is to count the breaths. And if you don't have a practice, I would really, really encourage this. Even if you do, it can be helpful if in a sit, maybe with some extra distraction, just to start counting each exhalation all the way through. One, two. This teacher I mentioned, Ruben Habito, years ago, he was invited to lead a weekend intro to Zen retreat for 60 graduating high school girls from a school in Japan. Their teacher had given them this experience as a graduation present, and most of them had never sat before. So Friday night to Sunday early afternoon, lots of instruction, breath counting, posture, um, and talks given, I'm sure, now and then throughout, but lots of sitting. And at the end, having been instructed to count the breath, that was the only, they were all doing that. At the very end of the retreat, they turned around, faced inward, and were asked, how was this for you? And, my knees, my back, my shoulders, my mind hurt. And some said, I'm curious. I've got to check this out some more. There was one young woman, teenager, who said, for just one moment, there was nothing but three. I think I'll take up this practice. The traditional teaching, these images to sit like a mountain. Let your thoughts just pass by like clouds. I like this image from Mikaku Sato Roshi, good friend, who, clouds, there's nothing there. Airplanes fly right through them. And it's, just how we get caught, how we stick to nothing at all. Another image is letting the thoughts just sort of rise up like bubbles, arising, disappearing. No need to track or follow after them. No need to put two together, like beads. Just as soon as you notice, let it go. If thoughts don't disperse, if you get caught in a loop, it can be helpful to check your body. Henry talks about this a lot. Is there a body sensation associated with the thought? Maybe a constriction somewhere that you notice. No need to analyze. If you notice that, just allow it. Allow some space. It may dissolve on its own. If not, the invitation is to check in with your heart. Whatever's there, just allow. Trust the breath. Entrust yourself to the breath. You can also entrust yourself to the silence. Even the silence in sound. That silence is boundless, and it has the capacity to be thoroughly transformative. Dogen called silent sitting, this zazen, the still, still state. Hyphen again, still, still state, or mountain still sitting. Last Thursday at the regular Thursday night sit at Mountain Cloud, I found myself at the beginning of the sit just checking to make sure that our guest was there, and Henry came especially to introduce him. And so it was, unusually during the sit, taking a moment to look at the sitting. And the impact of that, it really, this visceral sense of each one sitting so distinct and yet complete. This settled quality, this actively settled quality. It was so beautiful. The word behold came up, just as it is. This practice is countercultural. We're not trying to add anything to ourselves. It's not about self-improvement, but to really let it go. Whatever the obstacles are that keep us from seeing, just let them dissolve, let them melt away. Let everything go. This might sound fearful. It can, especially as it draws near that falling away. But it's really a great joy. Such a joy. Sometimes called the great relief. So I just want to take a moment and share among the many introductory teachings in Zen, one of my favorites, this nutshell teaching of the three fruits of Zen. what it is we're doing here. And again, they come, 1, 2, 3, as though they're stages, but it's that circle. So the first is called joriki, concentration. You could write that sometimes like with a hyphen, concentration, this gathering in, living out of the center of your being. It's a gathering power, but not power over anything. And then out of this immense stillness, this powerful stillness, in an unguarded moment, on or off the cushion, there can be a sudden shift. That I, me, mine, that we set up at the center of our experience suddenly just vanishes or recedes so much. Some people describe this as letting yourself go in the act of uniting with something. It's a little strange because unite sounds like two, and there's just one. This kensho, seeing your true nature. When that sense of separation dissolves, the whole world comes rushing in. Again, one body, my body, one existence, one boundlessness. And finally, the third fruit is often called personalizing. And this is a living, lifelong, no question. It's embodying this freedom, this wisdom and compassion, wisdom of, often called this emptiness or goneness, this no hindrance of mind, nothing impeding anything. That wisdom, that freedom and compassion. So to really live that out moment to moment, to be lived out by it. It's often called coming home, uncompromising oneness. To see and really discover that love in all things, then live it out in our day-to-day life. Whenever I speak about these three fruits these days, this talk that Ruben gave on them comes up, and I just briefly share it. He had gotten a call the night before from a friend who had been diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer. The prognosis was a few months to live. Ruben said the friend was at peace. And then he said, how readily this can happen. So let's assume, he said, this is my last teisho. It is my last. What do I want to convey? And then he spoke about these three fruits in the form of the ABCs of Zen. So simple and so fundamental. A, we're calling this joriki concentration. A, attention. also occurs to me it could be absorption. Stop and see. That's stop, attention. And then be, this coming home, belonging, unconditional belonging. That dissolving of the separate self, that uncompromising oneness. Be, I want to say, beloved. And see, compassion. Could also be clarity. I actually think they're of one piece. The clearer we are, the more that compassion just comes unimpeded. Shunryu Suzuki, in that book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, says, treat every moment as your last. It is not preparation for something else. So we might notice in sitting the tendency to want to lean forward into anticipating what's next, or anticipating the next moment, anticipating, maybe the bell, or to hang back, holding on to something that's past. Just hang back a little. It's actually way more comfortable to be in the present, fully here. It's really all there is. There's nothing else to know. I mean, address that to our anxieties. The more we taste this moment, the more it opens up, the more we open, more spacious, boundless, timeless, free. It's the place of practice and the place of our life. The true human heart. So again, so grateful for this chance to dive in fully with empty hands. Thank you for listening. Thank you for this shared practice.